everyone. I am Mariel Jane Pilarca. Today I will be discussing one of the most influential Islamic scholars in history, Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali, also known as Al-Ghazali. His work shaped Islamic theology, philosophy, Sufism. Sufism, we will talk it about later. And his influence extends beyond the Islamic world, affecting Western philosophy as well. Al-Ghazali lived during 11th and 12th centuries, a time of great intellectual activity in the Islamic world. He was a brilliant theologian, a philosopher, and a mystic, known for his critical engagement with Aristotelian philosophy, his deep reflection on Islamic jurisprudence, and his eventual turn towards spiritualism and Sufism. His famous work, The Incoherence of the Philosophers, significantly changed the course of Islamic thought by challenging rationalist philosophers like Ibn Sina. However, these later works, such as The Revival of Religious Science, demonstrated his embrace of mysticism and spirituality. By the end of this discussion, I hope to give you a clearer understanding of who Al-Ghazali was, what he contributed, and why his legacy remains relevant today. Let's proceed to the first slide, the early life and education of Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali was born in 1058 Christ era in Taos. I didn't find any date of his actual date of birth, but the other sources says, according to them, that he was born on 1058 Christ era in Taz. Taz is a city of present day of Iran. From a young age, he displayed remarkable intellectual abilities. He studied Islamic law, theology, and philosophy under some of the greatest scholars of his time. His early education took place in Nishapur, where he studied under Al-Juwayni, a leading Asharat theologian. Under Al-Juwayni, he gained expertise in Islamic jurisprudence and philosophy. After his teacher's death, Al-Ghazali's intellectual reputation grew, and he was invited to the Nizamiya school in Baghdad, the most prestigious institution of learning at the time. He became a renowned professor and advisor to the Abbasid Caliph, gaining immense influence in religious and political circles. However, despite his success, Al-Ghazali experienced a profound personal and intellectual crisis. He began questioning the nature of knowledge, the validity of philosophy, and the depth of his own faith. This crisis led him to abandon his prestigious post and embark on a spiritual journey. Let's proceed to the third slide, which is the political and social context of Al-Ghazali. By the 11th century, the Abbasid Caliphate, which once controlled a vast empire from Spain to India, had lost much of its political authority. The caliphs in Baghdad were largely symbolic rulers, overshadowed by the rising power of military leaders and regional governors. The Abbasid caliphs still held a religious legitimacy as successors of the Prophet Muhammad. However, real political power has shifted to the Seljuk Turks, a dynasty of Turkic warriors who ruled much of the Islamic world. The Seljuk Turks were originally nomadic people who embraced Sunni Islam and established a powerful empire in the 11th century. Under leaders like Togril Beg and Alp Arslan, the Seljuks conquered large part of the Middle East, including Persia and Iraq. In 1055, Togril Beg took control of the Baghdad, effectively reducing the Abbasid caliphs to figureheads. These Seljuks became de facto rulers of the Islamic world, with their sultans holding military and political power. Their empire stretched from Anatolia to Central Asia, with Nizam al-Mulk, a brilliant vizier overseeing administration. One of the most influential figures of the Seljuk period was Nizam al-Mulk, the vizier or chief minister of the Seljuk sultans. He founded the Nizamiya schools, prestigious institutions of learning to promote Sunni orthodoxy, So why did I discuss this? Because it is connected to Al-Ghazali, because Al-Ghazali, a gifted scholar, was appointed as professor at the Nizamiya schools in Baghdad in 1091 in Christ era. So this position made him an important figure in defending Sunni Islam against competing ideologies such as Shia Islam and philosophical rationalism. The Seljuk Empire was not free from eternal strife. After the assassination of Nizam al-Mulk in 1092 and the death of Sultan Malik Shah in the same year, the empire faced political instability. So different Seljuk rulers fought for power, weakening central authority. This instability influenced Al-Ghazali's decision to leave Baghdad and focus on the spiritual journey, leading to his later works in Sufism and personal religious experience. So let's proceed to the next slide, which is the one of the most famous work of Al-Ghazali, which is the Tahafut al-Falasifa, or translated with the incoherence of the philosophers. So the Incoherence of the Philosophers is a philosophical and theological critique of Islamic philosophers, particularly Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina, who were heavily influenced by Greek thought. So in this book, Al-Ghazali argues that reason alone is insufficient to understand ultimate truth, and that certain philosophical ideas contradict Islamic teachings. So, why did Al-Ghazali write this book? Because during Al-Ghazali's time, Greek philosophy, particularly the work of Plato, Aristotle, and Plotinus, had been translated into Arabic and were widely studied by Muslim scholars. So, thinkers like Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina attempted to harmonize Greek philosophy with Islamic theology. So, using Aristotelian logic and Neoplatonic metaphysics to explain Islamic beliefs. However, this created tension between philosophers and religious scholars. So, philosophers emphasized the reason and logic over revelation, while theologians such as Al-Ghazali argued that divine revelation is ultimate source of the knowledge. So, Al-Ghazali wrote the Incoherence of the Philosophers as a direct attack on philosophers who believed were undermining Islam. His goal was to prove that philosophy is unreliable when it contradicts religious truth. So the main argument of his book is, in the book, Al-Ghazali examines 20 philosophical doctrines that he believes are flawed. Among them, he considers 3 doctrines as heretical or kufr because they contradicted Islamic teachings. First is the eternity of universe, or rejecting creation of ex nihilo. So, what did the philosophers say? So, philosophers like Aristotle, Al-Farabi, and Avicenna taught that the universe is eternal and has always existed. They argued that God did not create the universe as a specific time, but is simply a necessary being that exists eternally along with the world. So, Al-Ghazali rejected that idea, insisting that the universe was created by God from nothing, which is the ex nihilo, at a specific moment in time. He argued that God's will is absolute and not bound by logical necessity. To deny creation, he claimed that is to reject the Quranic teachings about God as the creator. Second one is God's only knows universal, not particular. So, Ibn Sina and other philosophers believe that God only knows universal truth, such as general principle about the world. They argued that God does not know individual events or specific details about people's lives. So, Al-Ghazali again, he rejected the idea. as a directed attack on God's omniscience. He argued that God knows everything, both universal truth and particular details. He said that this philosophical view contradicts the Quran, which portrays God as being deeply involved in the world. Next is the denial of bodily resurrection. So what did philosophers say? Many philosophers believe that the only soul is immortal, while the body perishes forever. They saw the description of paradise and hell in the Quran as symbolic, not literal. So, Al-Ghazali argued that Islam teaches bodily resurrection, where both body and soul will be judged by God. He argued that denying bodily resurrection undermines the core teachings of Islam about the afterlife and divine justice. One of the most famous arguments in the incoherence of the philosophers is Al-Ghazali's critique of causality. This argument would later influence Western philosophers, including David Hume. Aristotle and later Muslim philosophers believe that necessary causation, meaning that one event always causes another based on natural laws. For example, fire necessarily burns paper because it is natural properties. So Al-Ghazali rejected the idea of necessary causation, arguing that causality is not inherent in nature but it is entirely dependent on God's will. He claimed that when fire burns paper, it is not because fire has intrinsic power to burn, but because God's will the burning to happen each time. So this means that everything happens only because of God's direct intervention, not because of natural causes. So for example of Al-Ghazali's views on causality, like imagine you throw a rock at a window and the glass breaks. So philosopher would say that the rock necessarily caused the window to break because of physical laws. So Al-Ghazali would say the rock did not break the window. God caused the window to break at that moment. So this argument introduced the idea of occasionalism, which later influenced Western skepticism about causality. So the impact of the incoherence of the philosophers, first is the decline of the philosophy and Islamic world. Al-Ghazali's book shook the foundation of Islamic philosophy and led to a decline in the study of Greek influence taught in the Muslim world. His attack on rationalist philosophy made many scholars focus on theology, which is kalam, and mysticism, which is Sufism, instead of Greek logic. Over time, this contributed to the gradual decline of philosophy in Islamic civilization, especially in Sunni regions. So the response from Ibn Rushd, a century later, the philosopher Ibn Rushd wrote a rebuttal called The Incoherence of the Incoherence, or Tahafut al-Tahafut, defending philosophy against Al-Ghazali's attack. Ibn Rushd argued that the reason and revelation are not conflict, but rather, philosophy helps to deepen one's understanding of religion. However, this influence remains stronger in Europe than the Islamic world, as his work were translated into Latin and influenced like Thomas Aquinas. So did we get it? But if you guys don't get it or understand clearly, I have more additional explanation in the next slide, which is the limits of reason. So Al-Ghazali was one of his key ideas was the limits of human reason in understanding ultimate truth. He argued that while reason is useful, it is not sufficient on its own grasp spiritual and metaphysical realities. Instead, divine revelation and mystical experience, which is Sufism, provide the highest form of knowledge. This idea was central to his critique of philosophers like Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina, who tried to use Greek rationalism to explain Islamic beliefs. Al-Ghazali argued that reason must be guided by faith because there are certain truths that reason alone cannot reach. So according to Al-Ghazali, his work, The Incoherence of Philosophers and the Deliverance from error, Al-Ghazali described three levels of knowledge. First is the sensory knowledge or experience from the senses. So this is the most basic form of knowledge based on sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. While useful for everyday life, the senses can be deceived. Like for example, a stick appears bent in water, but it is actually straight. The second way The second one is rational knowledge, which is the logic and philosophy. This include mathematics, logic, and philosophical reasoning. It is more reliable than sensory knowledge, but it has limits. It cannot fully grasp the divine realities. Next is the spiritual knowledge, faith, and mystical experiences. This is the highest form of knowledge gained through divine revelation or the Quran and mystical experience, which is Sufism. Unlike reason, which depends on human logic, spiritual knowledge comes from God and gives direct certainty. So Al-Ghazali believed that philosophers overestimated the power of reason, and that's true. Knowledge comes only through God's guidance. So, like I said, I will give new explanation of the explanation I discussed earlier. So, in the Incoherence of Philosopher, Al-Ghazali argued that philosophy fails in three major areas. That first is reason cannot explain the creation of the universe. So, just like I said, like philosopher like Aristotle and Avicenna argued that universe is eternal, has always existed. So Al-Ghazali rejected this, saying that only revelation can tell us the truth that God created the universe from nothing, which is ex nihilo. He argued that reason cannot explain why the universe began, since it depends on divine will, not logic. So reason cannot prove God's personal knowledge. So Avicenna believed that God's only general laws of the universe, so not specific details of individual lives. Al-Ghazali rejected this, saying that God is all-knowing and personally involved in creation. He argued that human reason cannot grasp the full nature of divine knowledge. So, reason cannot explain the afterlife. Many philosophers saw heaven and hell as symbolic, not as a physical places. Al-Ghazali insisted that the resurrection, paradise, and hellfire are literal realities. He argued that reason cannot comprehend the mysteries of our afterlife, which are only known through revelation. So this example shows that for Al-Ghazali, reason is too limited, not understand deep theological truths. Ghazali shift from rational philosophy to mystical Sufism was one of the most significant moments in Islamic intellectual history. He started a philosopher and theologian, but eventually he realized that the reason alone could not provide ultimate certainty about God and the afterlife. He then turned to Sufism, which he believed offered direct experience of the divine. This transformation changed the course of Islamic thought, leading to a greater acceptance of Sufism with Sunni Islam. This transformation challenged the course of Islamic thought, leading to a greater acceptance of Sufism within Sunni Islam, while weakening the influence of Greek-inspired philosophy. So why did Al-Ghazali turn to Sufism? So I discussed earlier the explanation of what he is disagreed of the ideas of other philosophers, which is the limitation of reason, the afterlife, the causality. So Al-Ghazali was a brilliant scholar, deeply trained in Islamic law or Sharia, theology, which is Kalam, and philosophy. He became professor in Nizamiya Madras in Baghdad. I already discussed earlier. One of the most prestigious schools in the Islamic world. So he studied the works of Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina, who tried to combine Islamic beliefs and Greek philosophy, just like I said earlier. So at first, Al-Ghazali believed that reason and logic could explain everything, including God, the soul, and the universe. But over time, he became increasingly doubtful of philosophy's ability to provide true knowledge. So, I discussed earlier that the spiritual crisis of Al-Ghazali, which is the head of the reliability of the reason. So, he disagreed many issues of the other philosopher, that's showing that reason was not reliable path to certainty. So he suffered psychosomatic symptoms such as being unable to speak or eat properly. So he felt that his academic success was driven by pride and worldly ambition rather than true devotion to God. Al-Ghazali concluded that intellectual reasoning alone was not enough. He needed a spiritual certainty. This led him to leave his prestigious position, wealth, and status to seek the truth through Sufism. So why did Al-Ghazali chooses Sufism? Sufism is the mystical branch of Islam focusing on direct personal experience of God through meditation and prayer. Sufism also is the focus on purification of the soul from worldly attachments. And also, Sufism focus on divine love and surrender to God's will. Al-Ghazali saw three problems with philosophy and theology that Sufism could solve, which is the philosophy relies too much on human reason. Like as I said before or earlier, philosophers like Ibn Sina and Al-Farabi used logic to explain God, but failed to reach certainty. Their ideas often contradicted Islamic beliefs, such as their view that the universe had no beginning. Al-Ghazali argued that God cannot be understood purely through reason. Divine truths must come from revelation and a spiritual experience. Next is the theologians focus on debating rather than experiencing God. So Islamic theologians defended that Islamic belief using rational arguments. However, their knowledge was intellectual, not spiritual. They talk about God but did not feel His presence. So the last one is Sufism offers direct experience of God. Unlike philosophers and theologians, Sufis seek God through personal experience, prayer, and love. Al-Ghazali believed the heart, not the mind, is the key to divine knowledge. Through meditation, devotion, and detachment from the world, Sufis achieve certainty about God. So this realization led Al-Ghazali to embrace Sufism as the highest path to truth. After turning to Sufism, Al-Ghazali left everything behind. He abandoned his teachings, position, and material wealth. He traveled for nearly 10 years to cities like Mecca, Medina, Damascus, and Jerusalem, seeking spiritual purification. He lived in solitude, fasting, praying, and reflecting on God's presence. So, after years of spiritual practice, Al-Ghazali wrote his masterpiece, written after his spiritual crisis and turned to Sufism. This book integrates Islamic law, which is Sharia, theology, Kalam, and mysticism, which is Sufism, into unified religious philosophy. So, why did Al-Ghazali write it? So, he saw a crisis in Islamic society. Many scholars focus on external rituals but neglected inner spiritually. So, he wanted to revive the true essence of Islam, emphasizing that faith is not just about legal rules but about purifying the soul. So, he sought to reconcile Islamic law and Sufism, proving that Sufism was essential for a devout Muslim life. So, the book became one of the most widely read and studied texts in Islamic civilization, influencing scholars, theologians, and Sufis for centuries. The book is divided into 4 parts, so each focusing on a different aspect of Islamic life. First is the act of worship, which is ibadat, the outer and inner dimensions of worship. So it is about the covers of 5 pillars of Islam, which is praying, fasting, charity, pilgrimage, and faith. So it explains that true worship is not about performing rituals, but it doing them with sincerity and devotion, emphasizing that inner meaning of worship. Prayer should not be mechanical but filled with love for God. Second one is social norms or adat, ethical and moral conduct in daily life. Discusses Islamic ethics such as honesty, patience, gratitude, and humility. Teaches how Muslims should behave in marriage, business, and community life. Stresses that good character is important as religious practice. The third one is the destructive vices, which is muhikat, the disease of the heart. So it identifies the spiritual disease such as pride, greed, envy, hypocrisy, and arrogance. Shows how these vices destroy faith and distance a person from God. So it's provided a method for purifying the soul based on self-reflection and sincere repentance. The last one is path to salvation, which is munjat, the journey to spiritual perfection. It discusses how develop sincerity, patience, gratitude, love for God, and reliance on Him. Explains Sufi practices like meditation, remembrance of God, and asceticism. So it teaches that true happiness comes from closeness to God, not from worldly success. The major themes in the revival of religious sciences is first is the knowledge and action must be combined. So many scholars in Al-Ghazali's time focus only on memorizing religious texts without applying them in life. So Al-Ghazali emphasized that true knowledge leads to action and learning without practice is useless. A scholar should not teach Islam but also live according to its teachings. So the second one is the heart is the key to true faith. So Al-Ghazali taught that spiritual purification is more important than legal debates. Worshipping should not be an external practice but also comes from a sincere and humble heart. So spiritual disease like arrogance and greed must be removed to develop true devotion to God. Third one is balancing Islamic law and Sufism. Some scholars at that time opposed Sufism, believing that it was too mystical and prayed from Islamic law. Al-Ghazali defended Sufism, showing that it was fully compatible with Islamic teachings. He argued that the true Muslim follows both Sharia and Tariqah, which is the law and the spiritual path. So, the ultimate fourth is ultimate goal of life, which is the knowing and loving God. Al-Ghazali taught that happiness does not come from material success, but from experiencing the presence of God. The highest goal of life is to achieve nearness to God through faith, love, and devotion. So the impact and the legacy of the revival of religious sciences is it is the one of the most influential books in Islamic history. So the revival of religious sciences became the central book in Islamic education, studied in mosque and madrasas for centuries. It was translated into Persian, Turkish, and many other languages, spreading its influence across the Muslim world. So it is strengthened the rule of Sufism in Sunni Islam. Al-Ghazali made Sufism more acceptable to mainstream Sunni scholars. His teachings influenced later Sufi masters like Rumi and Ibn Arabi. So Al-Ghazali reminded Muslims that Islam is not just about rules, but it is about inner purity and moral character. His teachings encourage Muslims to seek a deeper connection with God rather than follow rules. So, Al-Ghazali's ideas influenced both religious scholars and Sufi mystics. Even today, Iya is considered one of the most greatest books in Islamic spirituality and ethics. So let's proceed to the Al-Ghazali's influence in Islamic law, which is fiqh. So Al-Ghazali was trained as a jurist in the Shafel School of Islamic Law, one of four major Sunni legal traditions. So Al-Ghazali studied under leading scholars of his time, and because of Master of Islamic Jurisprudence, so Al-Ghazali has a contribution in Islamic law. He strengthened the Shafil School of Law. As dedicated Shafil jurist, Al-Ghazali reinforced the principles of the school. He wrote Al-Mustafa, one of the most comprehensive work on usul of fiqh, or principle of Islamic jurisprudence. He emphasized that legal ruling must be based on reason and divine guidance. Before Al-Ghazali, many jurists focused on external rules, which is Sharia, but neglected inner sincerity, which is Niyya. Al-Ghazali argued that a law is only meaningful if it is practiced with sincerity. For example, prayer. It is not just about performing rituals, but about achieving closeness to God. So, one of Al-Ghazali's major contribution was highlighting the importance of intentions in legal and ethical decisions. He argued that the spiritual value of an action depends on person's sincerity. This idea influenced later jurists who gave more weight to internal motivation when issuing legal rulings. So, Al-Ghazali supported Etihad, which is the independent legal reasoning, the practice of deriving new legal rulings based on the Quran and Hadith. He warned against blindly following past scholars, arguing that each generation must apply the law to its own time. So, this encouraged intellectual flexibility in Islamic law, allowing it to adapt to changing circumstances. So, Al-Ghazali's influence Islamic law with his works became the standard textbook in madrasas across the Muslim world. Later, jurists studied his writings on jurisprudence and incorporated his ideas. So before Al-Ghazali, some jurists viewed Sufism as a separate from or even opposed to Islamic law. Al-Ghazali defended Sufism as a necessary part of Islamic ethics and law. His arguments made him spirituality a key component of legal discussion. So Al-Ghazali's ideas influenced great jurists like Ibn Taymiyyah, the Qayyim, and Al-Nawawi. His emphasis on intentions and ethics in law shaped later Islamic legal thoughts. So in conclusion, Al-Ghazali strengthened the Shafi'i school of law and developed usul fiqh through works like Al-Mustafa. He bridged the gap between law and spirituality, making ethics as an essential part of legal rulings. His ideas on intentions, independent reasoning, and Sufism continue to influence Islamic law today. So Al-Ghazali's work ensured that Islamic law remained not just the system of rules, but a path to spiritual moral exercise. So let's proceed to the Al-Ghazali's influence of Western thoughts. So Al-Ghazali's work was not only shaped Islamic theology, law, and mysticism, but also had profound impact on Western philosophy and Christian thoughts. Al-Ghazali's influence on Western thoughts came through three main areas. First is the critique of Aristotelian philosophy. I discussed earlier, his book, The Incoherence of the Philosophers, influenced Christian and Jewish thinkers who debated the role of reason and faith. And the second one is influence on scholasticism. His ideas contributed to the debate of medieval European philosophers like Thomas Aquinas. And the last one is impact on skepticism and empiricism. His arguments about the limits of reason foreshadowed the ideas of later Western philosophers like David Hume. Many medieval Christian philosophers like Thomas Aquinas studied Aristotle's work. However, Al-Ghazali's attack Aristotelian philosophy, arguing that pure reason alone cannot fully explain reality. His book, The Incoherence of the Philosophers, criticized thinkers like Ibn Sina and Al-Farabi who tried to merge Islam and Greek philosophy. Al-Ghazali's arguments question the eternity of the universe, God's role in creation, and the reliability of human reason. Al-Ghazali critique of philosophy was translated into Latin and Hebrew, influencing European intellectual circles. Jewish philosophers like Moses Maimonides adopt some of the Al-Ghazali's ideas in his books The Guide Perplexed. Christian theologians like Thomas Aquinas and John Duns Scotus engage with arguments similar to Al-Ghazali's in their debates on reason and faith. The Christian idea that philosophy should serve theology, not replace it, was strengthened by Al-Ghazali's critics. Al-Ghazali in the development of scholasticism. So what is scholasticism? Scholasticism was the dominant intellectual tradition in medieval Europe, combining faith and reason to understand Christian doctrine. Key figures like Aquinas, Albertus Magnus, and Bonaventure debated how much reason should be used in theology. Al-Ghazali reconciliation of faith and reason influenced medieval Christian thinkers who sought to defend their religion against pure rationalism. His idea that reason has limits was similar to arguments made by later Christian scholars. Some of his theological methods influenced Aquinas' concept of divine knowledge and causality. Like Al-Ghazali, Aquinas argued that some truths can be known by reason but others require divine revelation. So let's proceed to the second to the last slide, which is why Al-Ghazali matters today. It is because his ideas still influence how people think about religion, philosophy, and spirituality. He explored big questions like the relationship between faith and reason, how we can find truth, and how to live a meaningful life. His work is important in science and religion because he believed reason has limit and some truths come from faith. This is still debated today. Can religion and science work together or should they be separated? Some say he discouraged science, but others believe he encouraged balanced approach. His teachings on spirituality and self-improvement are also valuable today in a world full of stress, distractions, and materialism. His writing on inner peace, sincerity, and ethics help people find purpose and deeper meaning in life. Al-Ghazali also tackled doubted, doubt and skepticism, which many people struggle with today. His journey from questioning everything to finding faith shows that doubt can lead to a greater understanding rather than just confusion. To conclude, Al-Ghazali's work connects different religious and philosophical traditions. He influenced not just Islam but also Christian and Jewish thinkers, showing that different beliefs can have meaningful discussion instead of conflict. So in short, Al-Ghazali still matters because he helps us think about faith, knowledge, and how to live a good life in a complicated world. Conclusion of all my report, Al-Ghazali was one of the most influential thinkers in Islamic history, shaping philosophy, theology, mysticism, and even scientific thought. His critique of rationalist philosophy, particularly in the coherence of the philosophers, challenged the dominance of Greek logic in Islamic thought, leading to debates that still resonate today. While some argue that his rejection of certain philosophical ideas slowed scientific progress, others believe that he helped balance faith and reason, ensuring that religious beliefs remain central to intellectual life. His contribution to Islamic theology, particularly Ajaret thought, reinforced the idea that divine will is beyond human comprehension, emphasizing faith over pure rationalism. His later turn to Sufism made spirituality more acceptable within Orthodox Islam, influencing countless Muslim scholars and spiritual seekers. His most famous work, The Revival of Religious Sciences, remains a guide for personal ethical development, offering wisdom on sincerity, morality, and devotion. Despite criticism from philosophers, scientists, and even some mystics, Al-Ghazali's legacy endures because he addressed timeless human concerns, the nature of truth, the struggle between doubt and belief, and the quest for meaningful life. His work continues to inspire debates on religion and sciences, reason and faith, and spirituality and philosophy, making making him a key figure not just in Islamic thought but in the broader history of ideas. So thank you for listening, and I hope you understand my report.